The Air Force has moved rapidly on its first collaborative combat aircraft, progressing from concept to first flight in just 16 months. These autonomous aircraft are expected to operate alongside crewed fighters, expanding sensing, strike, and survivability in contested airspace. As the service prepares for the next phase of development, it is working closely with industry to ensure the program delivers capability while balancing cost, scalability, and operational flexibility. This afternoon, we'll explore what innovations in the Air Force wants to see from industry in future CCAs and what the integration of drone wingmen may mean for future combat operations. To discuss these issues, I'm pleased to announce our panelists. First off, we have Becca Wasser, the defense lead at Bloomberg Economics and an adjunct senior fellow in the defense program at CNAS. We have Colonel Timothy Helfrich, the portfolio acquisition executive for fighters and advanced aircraft at the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center. And I'm joined by Jason Levin, the senior vice president for air dominance and strike at Anduril. Thank you all so much for being here. And all of you bring a wide range of firsthand expertise and knowledge related to collaborative combat aircraft. So I'd like to start by taking a moment from each of you to take us back a little bit into your careers for when you first learned about the concept and what your reaction to the idea of drone wingmen was then, and what your reaction to what we're seeing with CCAs is now. So, Colonel Helfrich, I want to start with you. You started your career as an A-10 mechanical systems engineer. How has that past experience informed your current fighter portfolio and how the service is approaching CCAs?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So you're kind of taking me back in the Wayback Machine a little bit there. I remember Second Lieutenant Timothy Helfrich reporting to Hill Air Force Base to work on A-10 mechanical systems a few years ago. It was really, it was a great formative experience for me because I was basically the lead engineer for the fuel system as well as the flight control system. And we always talk about fly-by-wire flight controls right now, but the A-10 was really fly-by-cable. I mean, I spent a lot of time qualifying new vendors to build push rods and bell cranks to make that system work. And so when you kind of take that that concept and you then juxtapose it against what we're doing with our autonomous fighter aircraft with the CCA, it gives me perspective on what's happened over the last 20 years. I really got the first experience in CCA when I took over the Agile Development Office almost 4 years ago, and we were just getting started. I mean, literally, we were in a concept refinement phase. We saw some success with all the work AFRL had done with Skyborg, with the LCAP program, and we knew that there was a path to get to success. We knew that we could be aggressive, but it's been impressive how much we've been able to do just in that short amount of time to go from concept refinement and science and technology to having multiple flying vehicles, multiple MDSs out there showing what's possible, as well as the work that we've done on mission autonomy, which we could talk more about. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, I want to pivot to your career. Before joining Anduril, you worked for General Atomics, Boeing. You're now competing with General Atomics in the Air Force's CCA competition. Have you seen the concept of drone wingmen and the willingness for companies to invest in it evolve among the defense industry firsthand? Tell me a little bit about what your firsthand experience was with that, and what you think a fundamental moment for the industry was when it came to the drone wingman concept.
Yeah, and thanks for having me here today. Real honor to be talking with you all on this topic. It's very exciting. I've worked in unmanned aircraft my entire career, going back to General Atomics and Boeing and even on spacecraft. And so to finally see the Air Force really put a lot of energy and momentum behind the CCA concept to get robotic, semi-autonomous fighter aircraft out there has been extremely exciting. Like, I think it's what kind of the industry needs. We've been working on this, as Colonel Helfrich said, since some of the concept refinement days. And, we were kind of at Anduril, kind of the underdog a little bit. We didn't really even have an aircraft at the time, right? Tried to partner with a couple of different companies. And it was really when we met, I think, Blue Force Technologies, at least for us, was one of the defining moments to kind of partner up with a small scrappy startup that kind of had the concept for an airplane, we could really bring the software and the scale and the horsepower behind that to deliver a capability. And then I think one of the biggest defining moments, I think, is when the Air Force really decided to kick off really this program and move into the TMRR kind of phase with these production representative prototypes, right? Because then they really said, okay, this is a serious program. We're going to take it seriously. We're going to build real aircraft. We're going to fly them. We're going to do mission autonomy. We're going to do weapons integration. We're going to really get to a fielded capability by the end of the decade. So really by like kicking off kind of that starting gun, I think is really the defining point for the program and the capability.
Absolutely. Becca, turning to you on this, when did it become apparent to you in your research that drone wingmen would become the future of air combat operations? And then kind of in tandem with that, I want to ask, how have you witnessed the acceptance of AI and autonomous capabilities change among the national security at the same time?
Yeah, but great questions. And thanks again for inviting me to be here. It's great to be on this panel with so many esteemed folks. My first introduction to the idea of loyal wingmen was actually in a war game in 2015 when it was looking at the future of human machine teaming. And it was cross-service, defined broadly, trying to look at different technologies and how they could be integrated into different operational concepts. And the one that so many players, and again, cross-service, so not just Air Force, the thing that so many players kept on coming back to was this idea of loyal wingman drones and how that could be a supplement to a variety of different operations that they were doing. Since then, I think we've seen the concept become refined. We're not necessarily going to be focused on all missions and cross-domain. However, it did show this sort of initial promise, and what once started as something that was almost this, very futuristic technology has become reality, and frankly, in such a short amount of time. And the other thing that we've seen happen in, I would argue, a short amount of time is this acceptance of AI and autonomy, and seeing that accepted more broadly across the Joint Force and within the Department of Defense. Obviously, when we are talking about the adoption of AI, it is quite fraught at this current juncture in time, given some of the pushback from the Pentagon with various companies. I'm not going to go into that, but if you look at more of that service or unit level, or you talk to various warfighters, their ability to latch on to some of the products that are available to them, whether that is just developing a joint targeting workbench using AI, or whether that is embracing more of these autonomous systems, it's happened quite quickly. And it is something that I think there is a great appetite with. Obviously, so much of this is focused on trying to do the safe adoption of autonomous systems and AI, which makes sense because protection of the warfighter is one of the most important things that the department can do. But at the end of the day, there is an appetite to continually use these tools to improve the warfighter's ability to get after their mission, and to do so in a way that is incredibly in line with some of the values that I think the department wants to be putting forward.
That's some great insight from all of you. I think we really hit the broad spectrum of what the CCA development has looked like and how that has come off across in the national security community. We are not strangers to the concept of CCA's Defense One. We've been following the progress very closely in our coverage. And I think it's important to take a look at some of these massive milestones that have taken place since the award announcement in 2024. So, I mean, just this past year, we saw the first flights happen. This past year, we saw the Air Force implement the government-owned autonomy government reference architecture that was implemented and validated on the CCA. I'm curious to all three of you, and we'll just kind of go around the panel again. What has been the most significant milestone in your eyes since 2024? And which one are you looking forward to the most, or what will be the most telling about the program once you reach it? Colonel Helfrich, let's start with you on that.
Yeah, that's really a tough question to just say just one. And the reason for that is because CCA program is not just an airplane or even a couple airplanes. It's a new way of doing operations, and bringing what's really the new, which is the mission autonomy, to life. And so from what's happened recently, it would have to be an equal footing between getting to first flights for both aircraft within 16 months, and then with only a couple short months after that, getting to mission autonomy first flights with both aircraft, the YFQ-42 and YFQ-44, and both mission autonomies, both RTX Collins and Shield AI, plus the bonus flight of the Anduril mission autonomy. So we've it's really those two things together that have been the biggest. But if I go forward a little bit, what's going to be the thing that's most important this year in 2026? And I really believe that it is getting it in the hands of the Experimental Operations Unit. And if you're not familiar with the Experimental Operations Unit, they are the hand-picked organization that the Air Force has made a big bet on to set them up to be able to evaluate what we call tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs. Also evaluate how you actually integrate these new weapon systems into the force, because you don't just have to get the aircraft and the mission autonomy ready, you also have to get the force ready to be able to operate with them. And so getting the CCA in the hands of the EOU later this summer is really going to be the biggest milestone for making CCA go beyond what it is right now, which is prototypes and highly successful demonstrations and learning, to actually operationalizing, if that's actually a word, operationalizing CCA. So look forward to that over the next year.
Yeah. Becca or Jason, if you want to chime in next.
Sure. I'll jump in. I think, completely agree with Colonel Helfrich. I think there's been some major milestones in the past. Right. We at Anduril have several aircraft of YFQ-44A flying almost daily, each time doing a more complex mission, really pushing the envelope on hardware, but also software, because it's really a flying computer. And so we really got to think about that from the software perspective. But then from the hardware perspective, we've begun some of the weapons integration. If you've seen kind of some of the public release, we started flying with inert training rounds on our external wings on YFQ-44. We're doing this totally deliberately and responsibly with the U.S. Air Force. There's a plan, a build-up, a very safe build-up with the U.S. Air Force on that front. And then, as Colonel Helfrich said, we did a milestone a couple of weeks ago where, because we have a modular software architecture, leveraging the autonomy government reference architecture, right, a standardized interface between the aircraft and the mission autonomy, we're able to go up semi-autonomous, get into the range, basically turn on the Shield AI HiveMind mission autonomy, perform some missions, complex missions, and then turn it off and turn on the Lattice for mission autonomy developed by Anduril and IRAD, and fly around and do the same missions as well. And so basically, to be able to turn on two different, autonomous architectures there on the aircraft is a real milestone, and kind of validates the U.S. Air Force acquisition strategy here to decouple and really make an openness and competition. And I think that's really, a shining example of Department of War's acquisition transformation, right? To really do a new style of acquisition here, where we can really update software and bring best of breed online. And at least when I think about acquisition transformation and what that means, it's not just acquisition for acquisition's sake. It's actually doing whatever it takes to get the best capability to the warfighter when they need it, right? So it's at the speed and the scale that it needs. So it's not just a cool acquisition plan, it's actually delivering capability. And then along those lines, big upcoming milestone, I completely agree with Colonel Helfrich, it's getting it in the hands of the EOU. So we're going to move from Anduril operating these aircraft to being Anduril over the shoulder. So by the summer, right, the U.S. Air Force will be operating these aircraft. They'll be doing weapons employment. They'll be doing mission autonomy, multi-ship flights. And that's rapid. I mean, that's new for this program, really, to be from first flight to really having the Air Force actually operate it in under a year, I think is unprecedented, and is something that's going to allow us to actually get this in the field very quickly.
I'll jump in, and while I am in violent agreement with Jason and the Colonel about what the next big milestone is, let me go far future and tell you what I'm really looking forward to. I'm really looking forward to scaled production of ACCA. And that's going to be incredibly important because so far we've had tremendous success in this rapid prototyping, trying something new, but being able to actually scale production and frankly at the numbers that the US Air Force might need and want for CCAs is going to be a big challenge. And it's going to be a challenge in different ways, depending on which companies are finally selected, and also whether it's going to involve other companies involved in that production opportunity as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how things go there, but starting to see CCAs actually roll off the line is one of the first things that we're going to have when we start seeing them actually being employed operationally outside of that experimentation context.
Becca, that's a great point, and I think that segues into my next question really well, and that's talking about just the costs of CCAs overall. So I think some autonomous systems that we're seeing that have been pitched in the last few months are seemingly quite exquisite. Some of the ones from different defense companies and such. I know a key component of the program has always been making something that is affordable. And I'm curious, has that remained true through increment 1? And do you think that will remain the case in increment 2, or is the threat environment going to dictate a more exquisite system in the near future that challenges the affordability element of the CCA? Colonel Helfrich, let's start with you, and then Jason and Becca again.
Yeah, I think what former Secretary Kendall had said is these things are going to be, I think, a third of the cost of F-35. And we're not going to get into the exact amount right now, but it is not only have we met that, we are doing much better than that. So we have most certainly kept the cost control component of this program and done better than many people predicted that we would do. More of that information will come out in the future, but we have done very good in driving down the cost. Moving into increment 2, remember what I said when I first got to this job, or when I first got to leading the ADO, we were in concept refinement for increment 1. We're in that same phase for increment 2. So we have 9 companies on contract to do concept refinement. And what we're doing in that phase is taking these operational use cases that we've defined through operational analysis, and they each have some basic attributes to them. Are they runway independent? Do they need to go 2,000 miles? Those kind of things. And we are working with these companies to bring those into a certain number of concepts. Now, those use cases do actually span the spectrum of a little bit more exquisite and some that are less expensive, even than the increment 1s. And so what we're going to do is we're going to follow the data and follow the analysis and figure out which of these provides the best return on investment, because you may need to buy many of the less expensive ones or less of the more expensive, more exquisite ones. We are doing that analysis, and we're going to let the data and the operational implications of what those concepts are lead the way for what we select.
Yeah. And then, if I could jump in on the kind of the cost and to, double tap on Becca's point on production, I think that's the critical piece, because we really talk about affordable mass. So it really is both sides of that coin. And I think sometimes people forget that. And so in terms of the producibility, right, we're moving production of YFQ-44 into our Arsenal facility in Columbus, Ohio, in a matter of days, actually. We're going to start production there. And so this is our hyperscale production facility, 5 million square feet in Columbus, where we'll be able to produce YFQ-44s at rate, but also many other Anduril products as well. That was kind of the point of this. And then on the cost, as Colonel Helfrich said, we can't get into the actual dollars, but the point has been to drive the cost down. We've been doing that repeatedly throughout this program. And we've been doing that through leveraging a commercial supply base and a commercial supply chain. And so that has 2 benefits. One, we can go out to multiple vendors. That actually gives some price leverage as well, but also allows us to scale if the demand were to come. So if we need to build hundreds, multiple of these aircraft, we can get that done by going out to a broader supply base, not just kind of bottlenecked by 1 or 2 vendors. We've done that through our engine, our landing gear, a lot of the avionics components as well. And then on increment 2, like I can't really get into that, but I mean, that is something that, Anduril is probably going to pursue. If it's an autonomous aircraft, it's something we're probably going to look at, and we're probably going to look at, driving costs down even further as well.
So let me try and pull both of those threads, the operational validation to the cost. At the end of the day, it really comes down to how the Air Force decides that they want to actually employ these CCAs, the operational concepts that they are going to be a part of, and the missions that they are going to undertake. And there's a few different directions that, we could see them go through. And part of this is drawn on my experience from wargaming, as well as some of the research that I've done. So much right now is focused, and very rightfully so, on the air-to-air role that, CCAs could have, that they could essentially be pushed forward and put some space between fighters and a potential threat. But in some ways, that requires them to be attritable of sorts, and that means driving the cost down in order to allow them to be put forward as almost that first line of defense, but also potentially that first line of fire. There's another world in which perhaps maybe drawn on lessons learned from the current Iran war, where you actually would want to see a slightly different version where maybe you have more stealth CCAs going forward before the fighters to try and clear the way. That would require, the costs going up quite considerably. Same thing if you were to see the CCAs try and move into more of an air-to-ground role, in part because that's going to require them to likely carry heavier weapons than they are currently planned to do. So the operational concepts that they are going to be a part of really dictate some of those requirements. And in turn, that also dictates parts of the cost. So you can imagine how there could be different types of CCAs in the future that have different roles, have different costs, and are going to be employed in different ways. So I think it's really important that we kind of keep that framework in mind, in part because of how this has been structured, right? CCA is not a monolith. There's no one CCA. And part of that is the healthy competition that this program has brought, but some of it is also the differences in needs and constant evolution based on that rapidly changing battlefield. So you don't have a very expensive piece of equipment that is OBE by the time it actually needs to be employed.
No, excellent point too. And I think that also you kind of teed me up for my next question again, Becca. So I appreciate that. And talking about, I think with the current situation we're seeing with the war in Iran, drone warfare has been in the spotlight. We recently reported in a pretty in-depth story about how 4th and 5th generation pilots and fighters and the expensive munitions they carry, how that wasn't a sustainable strategy against small one-way attack drones that we're seeing. So I'm curious, and I know, not getting into operational details here whatsoever, how could CCAs change that equation in the near future? Becca, you touched on that a little bit with some of the examples that you provided, but I'm curious just in a general sense, if we can talk a little bit about, what we see that role being. Is it just a layered air defense? Is it advanced sensing? Is it perhaps offensive counter air missions against drone sites? What, if anything, lessons can we currently learn from what we're seeing that might be able to be applied to CCAs in the future?
I can get started. I think maybe one of the things with this question that because I don't want to make conjectures on current conflicts. What I will say is that what you're seeing with CCA is the acquisition transformation in action. The ability to set the government reference architecture, both for autonomy, but also for mission systems, which allows for modularity in software. It allows for easier modularity in hardware. It allows for a system to change roles, maybe from one mission to another, because it's modular and much of the aircraft is now software defined as opposed to hardware defined. Additionally, through CCA and acquisition transformation, we're focusing on competition. We have been driving competition this entire all of increment 1, and we're doing it with increment 2. We're doing it with mission autonomy. We actually have competition to get to have option awards for the consortium that builds the architecture, right? Every step of the way, it's competition so that we can bring the best of industry, the best of breed, because we all know that militaries don't go to war, nations go to war, and we have to have an industrial base that is with us to make that happen.
Yeah, I agree with the program. I think has been great in driving this competition and the modularity. It's really, we've embraced that at Anduril. We've fielded a lot of products and we see they really get used in a different way than we thought when they first get downrange. And so we know that's going to be the case with CCA. And so we made sure we have a flexible modular hardware and software architecture. So while the U.S. Air Force right now is focused on an air-to-air mission, it's very plausible, and we've been doing research and kind of some of our own funding to look at integration of air-to-ground weapons or counter cruise missile or counter Group 3 weapons, right? These guided rockets and things like that. Because we have external hard points, it's pretty easy or a little bit quicker to, integrate other weapons and other capabilities on the wings. So we've been investigating that, working very closely with the Air Force and other COCOMs to see what they would find interesting. And the fact that there is these open GRAs means that we're going to be able to swap that very quickly. We've already kind of had to do that on the program with some of the mission systems, leveraging these government reference architectures to be able to change mission systems already. And because that exists, right, it's kind of a plug and play hardware. We can roll some new software and get it integrated. And so I could see that very easily being done in the future for other missions as the U.S. Air Force and the broader, Department of War understands how they want to use these weapon systems in the future.
Yeah, it's great to hear all that you're doing and trying to think about the different ways and you can adapt more modular systems. Here, if I am looking at some of the initial lessons learned from an ongoing conflict, so these could be completely out the door by the time, the conflict is over. I think some of it is the U.S. has been able to gain, at least in that initial phase of the war, localized air superiority and has started to move towards expanding that area of air superiority to move towards air supremacy in order to be able to push in fighters, bombers to expend, joint direct attack munitions as opposed to some of the longer range, more exquisite standoff weapons. But you can envision that in the future where there are CCAs, they can help expand that area of air superiority faster, right? They can be the ones that push forward initially, whether that is either in an air-to-air and an air-to-ground mission, depending on what this potential future conflict could be. The ways in which they would allow for the Air Force to gain air superiority, or if not air supremacy, much faster. So I think that that's something that we could definitely take on as a potential role or way that they can be leveraged in the future. Additionally, just because, both Jason and the Colonel have mentioned the role of competition in this program, I think it's been such a smart and healthy thing for the defense industrial base. And I think it's also pushing the way forward in terms of innovation. Jason's mentioned a bunch of innovation that Anduril is doing. I think there's been a lot of innovation across the board from the companies that have been down selected, even to the ones who are outside of it. And I think one of the things that you've seen through the department's various missives and, changes, whether that is, the acquisition transformation or other programs, it's really been about creating competition and getting companies to also have skin in the game. And I think we've seen that with Northrop Grumman, funding their own approach with their own internal research and development funding. So that's the kind of healthy competition within the defense industrial base that allows for innovation, but also allows for collaboration. And I think we're seeing that across this program where you have so many different companies, from some of these non-traditionals to the small startups to some of the big primes, who are all collaborating together in order to move the needle forward on a really critical capability that's going to be needed for the U.S. to be able to deter and, if needed, actually defend and prevail in future warfare.
If I could jump in a couple things I just want to add here. First of all, probably the greatest asset that the U.S. Air Force has is our airmen. That, as Jason says, the products that Anduril is using oftentimes get used in ways that they didn't imagine. That's because of the ingenuity of our airmen. And that means that the more modularity, the more flexibility that we can build into the weapon systems that we provide them, the better, the more they can take that innovation to fill the gaps that might be there, and to do and look at new mission sets. And so making sure those innovative airmen have the flexibility and modularity will be huge in any current or potential future conflict. Also, want to mention something about competition, because we haven't talked a lot about it, but right now in the autonomy world, the mission autonomy world, we have set all the standards and interfaces between the aircraft and the autonomy, but we are currently working with industry to develop the interfaces and standards within a mission autonomy. And what that will allow is at the, like, if you want to say skill level or app level or tactic level, be able to go out and bring the best of breed, even from these really small companies that can't build a whole mission autonomy, but they've got a really good tactic for, doing multi-ship ranging or something like that. We're able to pull in, get even greater competition and bring in best of breed, not just as a monolithic mission autonomy, but in the individual skills that will then let our airmen pick the skills that are going to be best for the mission set that they're being asked to go do. Thanks.
That's excellent, Colonel Helfrich, and that actually goes to another topic I want to discuss, and that's a little bit about the human element here. And I'm glad you brought up the airmen in this equation. So I want to highlight a sentence from an Air Force press release last month that was announcing that Anduril CCA began weapons integration testing. It said that throughout development and testing, a human retains authority over weapons release decisions. CCA is designed to operate within established command structures and legal frameworks that govern all Air Force weapon systems. End quote there. And, Jason, you mentioned that a little bit, earlier in our conversation as well. Integrating autonomy into military operations comes at a time where public polling still shows that distrust in AI is still pretty high. And we're seeing high profile debates between the Pentagon and industry over this too. So I'm curious how the Air Force and industry are encouraging trust in its autonomous and AI systems. But specifically, Colonel Helfrich, I'm curious what that relationship looks like among airmen as well, how you're encouraging airmen, if trust is a two-way street there, trusting them to innovate with AI and autonomy, but also building that trust within the service itself.
Yeah, good question. So a couple of things I just want to make sure get out in front, like the CCA are semi-autonomous weapon systems. And the reason we specifically use those words is because there will be no lethal use of force without a human making that decision. And so that is just a fundamental way in which we are designing, building, and will implement CCA. Now, when it comes to trust, there's kind of a funny story that, I guess maybe not funny, but just interesting the way it happened. As we've been designing we call the pilot vehicle interface, it's really the tablet that the pilot or quarterback will use to interact with the CCA, with their wingman. When we first gave them the tablet, these are pilots that have lots of years experience. They wanted to know everything about that CCA. They wanted to, what's the oil pressure, or, every aspect of it, and control every little thing, essentially to remotely pilot the CCA. But as they learned more in simulation, and they trusted that the CCA would do what they needed, and when they got into situations where they didn't have the bandwidth to fly multiple aircraft, they trusted that the CCA would run the play that they called. And so they asked for, okay, I don't need that. I just need to, now I really, instead of having a view of every gauge on an aircraft, I really just want a bird's eye view so that I can click on an aircraft, give it a play, and move on to the other things that I need to do. And so as they became more comfortable, spend more times, got reps and sets, the quarterbacks trusted that the CCA would do what they were supposed to, and they needed less and less information, allowed them to actually be quarterbacks, or even maybe even coaches calling plays. when they're conducting simulated operations. And we expect to see that same thing happen when we get into live flight at the experimental operations unit later this year.
If I can just really quickly jump in on that, I think what the Colonel is talking about is something that you're seeing more broadly across the Air Force and probably also the other services when it comes to the integration of AI into flight and various aircraft and the trust of it. Some of my conversations with folks in the tanker community, for example, where they're trying to integrate AI into a lot of their operations, part of it is initially it seems to add to what they've referred to as, helmet fire. There's so much that they have to do at any given time, and it seems like an additional thing. But then eventually, as there is this, understanding and getting used to what the AI can bring, it actually reduces some of that noise and makes their jobs a lot easier. And so I think that dynamic is one that the Colonel mentioned specific to CCAs, but I think is across the board as we look at AI adoption.
Yeah, we've seen similar. It's just the repeated use by users that's going to build this trust in the system. So as we've fielded autonomous systems and they're used downrange, it's really at first the users are a little bit uncomfortable with what is it going to do, but then they just keep using it and they find the power that they now have, right? That they now understand the expected outputs and it's what they expect. It's kind of like when cameras for backing up in cars first came around. People were like, I don't know, I'm still going to turn my head. And now basically no one turns around, right? They just look forward, they look at the camera, they back up. It's just because you trust it. You've used it all the time. It's just commonplace. And so I think there's a base level of autonomy that's more or less trusted at this point. And I think now it's kind of these frontier AI labs that you see. That's a new thing that you're not sure what are the outputs going to be based on the inputs. And as we've started to integrate this, we've kind of tried to constrain where the AI lives and what the problems it's trying to solve are. So if it does do something a little bit weird, you get a hallucination or something like that, it's kind of bounded and the user's like, all right, that's a weird output, but I'm going to move on. I can still do my mission. And I think as we build that trust, we can kind of expand that envelope a little bit more. I also think it'll be based on which users we have, right? We have a lot of forward-thinking special operations units that are very comfortable using autonomy and AI, and they get a ton of value out of it, but that might not be for the masses. And I think that's where the experimental operations unit will come in perfectly, right? They'll start using this, they'll understand the limitations, what'll be better for the broad suite of airmen, what'll be better for kind of, special users, and they can kind of figure that out as they go. But I think there's no substitute for just starting to use the system and getting trust with just use.
Excellent. There's never enough time for these panels, so I think again, also thinking that I was over prepared for this panel, so I think I wrote like twice as many questions as we had time for. But starting to wrap up here, all of you have mentioned the acquisition reforms, and I do want to talk about one of them. Specifically, Colonel Helfrich, you went through a little bit of a rebrand with your job this past year. You were named the Portfolio Acquisition Executive for Fighters and Advanced Aircraft. Additionally, General Dale White was named as the Direct Reporting Portfolio Manager for Critical Major Weapon Systems. That includes CCAs. I'm curious if you can just unpack for us what has changed with your role now with your new title, as well as with General Dale White's role. And for the others on the panel here, what is the most significant impact that you see coming from these new acquisition roles and positions?
Yeah, I'll start. I'm probably kind of an interesting case because the same day that I was announced as the the program executive officer for Fighters and Advanced Aircraft, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes later, my position was converted to be the portfolio acquisition executive. So I didn't have a lot of time as a PEO, maybe 45 minutes, but we had been preparing for this within the Air Force. And so I've been observing PEOs for my career, and there was a lot within PEOs where they were managing multiple weapon systems. A portfolio acquisition executive, by definition, is looking at an integrated portfolio, right? The Air Force is also doing several other key things in this area, which is to push down authorities to the lowest level possible. If it's not the PAE, it's as close to the PAE as possible, so that we can have an alignment between authorities, responsibilities, and accountability. Whereas before there was a lot of accountability, but the authorities were kind of all over the place. And so putting that together allows the PAE to make trade-offs within their portfolio, especially when doing that while working with our requirements teammates. And so that's kind of the PAE. It's great being one of the first 5 in the Air Force, because we are getting the authorities and we are given the opportunity to go and execute with them and learn and feed back to the rest of the system. So getting to be, one time I said, hey, we're front row of this acquisition transformation thing. I said, no, I think we're in the front lines of the acquisition transformation, because it's not watching, it's doing. It's great to be in this position. I also get the unique opportunity to get to work for General White for part of my portfolio. As the DERPM, he is the Milestone Decision Authority, so MDA. He's not an SAE, he's not a DAE, he is the MDA for all of the programs in his portfolio. And so for CCA and F-47, which fall in the F-47 family of systems, he sets the strategic vision for those programs, sets the acquisition strategy, and then I lead my teams to go execute against that.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, right, is that I think like CCAs, robot fighter airplanes, that's pretty cool. Weapons integration, cool. Mission autonomy, yeah, that's cool. But really, the whole point is fielding operational capability, right? Getting something out to the warfighter, and that's what this is all about. And so, Colonel Helfrich always asked us, and I think all the vendors, kind of, what can you do to go faster, right? What risk can we take to get this out to the field and help our airmen and warfighters faster? And so I'm, hopeful with this transformation right in the acquisition system that we make some of these requests, and Colonel Helfrich and General White can kind of come back and say, yep, we're going to do these things and we're going to get it out there faster. And I think that's extremely important, because that's the whole point of this transformation, right? Actually field capability quicker, not just make up new titles, new acquisition. It's actually get capability out there.
I think jury's still out, but ultimately it's about the speed. It's about how quickly you can move, how quickly you can get those capabilities in the hands of warfighters, and how quickly they can refine how those capabilities might be used and what might be needed to either change the software or change the hardware in order to actually leverage some of the modularity that are being built in at this juncture in time.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Colonel Helfrich, Jason, Becca, thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Next, we will be turning our focus to the evolving role of space power in modern warfare.